Our lesson for today is all about mechanisms that produce changes in population from generation to generation. Evolution. Evolution is the gradual process of change is naturally occurring among populations at negligible rate. The founder of evolution is Charles Darwin. In 1859, Charles Darwin published a book entitled On the Origin of Species. It took him 22 years to find an explanation on how species changes over time. He began his work in 1831 at the age of 21 as the naturalist on HMS Beagle. On the Galapagos Islands, Darwin studied many species that were unique to the islands. And now, we have called evolutionary selection, specifically the natural selection and artificial selection. Before we get into that, let's define selection. Selection is a process where traits are selected or against and become more or less abundant in the population. Let's move on to natural selection. Natural selection is a process in nature by which organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and reproduce more than those less adapted to their environment.
Let's just say, for example, a gray tree frog and a green tree frog in dark areas. Gray tree frogs blend well in dark areas compared to green tree frog. The green tree frog is easier to find by the predators than the gray tree frog. Therefore, natural selection is favor tree frogs that live in habitats in which they are more camouflaged.
We also have the survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest explains that organisms who can best adjust with their environment has the most on surviving in reproducing.
For example, reproduction over generation. As you can see in the picture, white rabbit doesn't survive to predation and so doesn't reproduce, while brown rabbits are the most successful in reproducing.
Artificial selection. Artificial selection, also known as selective breeding. Over the past decade, selection was used by farmers and breeders to cause major changes in characteristics of their plants and animals. Artificial selections acquires the two criteria. First, the variation in population. Second, trait mass heritable. The difference in artificial selection is that humans decide which traits are passed on nature. Also, artificial selection uses agriculture animal breeding all the time.
For example, people want cows to produce the most milks all day, so they only breed cows that produces high amounts of milks.
Mutations. Mutations are original source of genetic variations. These are mistakes or a change in a living thing's DNA.
Cells are like the computer. A wrong DNA code gives the cell wrong message. The result is that the wrong type of protein is made. Although most mutations are harmless, some are serious.
There are two general types of mutations, the DNA mutations and the chromosomal mutations.
DNA mutation are mutations that happen when the gene changes in the nucleotide sequence of DNA. Next is chromosomal mutation, are mutations that occur when there are changes or abnormalities in the structure and number of chromosomes. And there are four types of chromosomal mutation, which is inversion, translocation, deletion, and duplication.
Allele frequencies. Allele frequencies in population may change due to mechanisms that produce changes in population. Genetic drift. Genetic drift is a change in allele frequencies in a population from generation to generation that occurs due to change events.
For example, a northern elephant seals have reduced genetic variation, probably because of a population bottleneck human inflicted on them in the 1890s. Hunting reduced their population size to as few as 20 individuals at the end of the 19th century.
Their populations has since rebounded to 30,000, but they have much less genetic variations than a population of southern elephant seals that was not so intensely hunted. Recombination. Recombination is a process by which pieces of DNA are broken and recombined to produce new combinations of alleles. This recombination process creates genetic diversity at the level of genes that reflects differences in the DNA sequence of different organisms. Gene flow. Gene flow involves the movement of genes in or out of population due to the movement or individual organisms or their gametes. Organisms and gametes that enter a population may have new alleles but in different proportions than those already in proportions.
For example, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from Sweden marries Indian, produces an offspring with alleles containing the traits.
But what if there is no mutation and natural selection? According to Hardy-Weinberg principle, that in infinitely large, interbreeding population in which mating is random and in which there is no selection, migration, or mutation, gene and genotype frequencies will remain constant from generation to generation. And there are 5 conditions for genetic equilibrium to occur. First, no mutation. Second, random mating. Third, no gene flow. Fourth, very large population size. And last, the natural no selection.
And this is Heart Dirty Fashion. I hope you learned something from me. Bye!